up her own life for the life.
I was asked by HHUGS to give some idea about other people who had been involved in the work that they do, to try and give some understanding of the difficulties and the challenges and the triumphs of what that work accomplishes. And I know HHUGS wants to pay tribute tonight to the people that they work with and applauds their inspirational courage. How day after day they show strength. They don't give in. They have hope. They have faith. And they demonstrate in every fibre of their being. And for that, HHUGS applauds them and HHUGS supports them. But I thought to tell you about one person some time ago in the 1970s, the early 1970s, when the first Prevention of Terrorism Act was brought in. And police carried out mass arrests, terrorized Irish communities. Men and women were locked up. And there was an Irish nun, an elderly woman, elderly at the time, in the 1970s, but through the 70s, 1980s, the 1990s, into the turn of the century, she was the only volunteer, with the hundreds of Irish men and women in English jails, deliberately kept in English jails when they could have been transferred to Irish jails, but kept as a deliberate, punitive part, unspoken, of their sentence to break them and their families. This elderly nun, who had taken a vow as a young woman to make a commitment for life to the church, rebelled against the thought that praying was enough. She said, it's not enough to pray for peace, you have to do something. She was reserved. She was an Irish woman in England at a time when to be Irish was an experience to be in fear. She was, in the Catholic Church, a woman in a man's world, bound by rigidity and obedience. But she did what nobody else did. She met families when they travelled, stopped under the provisions of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. She was nearly blind, but she learnt to drive, terrifyingly, and drove them to the prisons all over England where they were, the men and the women were dispersed. She gave them hope when nobody gave them hope, to time when to try to lodge in a bed and breakfast near a prison and being Irish was to be turned away. She badgered families to give them help and support. In a religious order where she was not allowed to possess worldly possessions or money, she badgered money from everyone in sight to send to the prisoners. She wrote hundreds of cards every Christmas and Easter and put money in. She was condemned for supporting men and women who were deemed to have blown up and killed people. And she said, this is not what God says. God says you may hate the sin, but you do not hate the sinner. And she said, this is what my faith should be. This is what I'm here to do. And for the wrongly convicted men and women, she fought She fought the government, parliamentarians, lawyers, organisations when no one believed there could be innocent men and women bricked up for life in English prisons. But she honoured the families. She didn't think that they were weak. She said, we're Irish, we're Republicans, we're strong. Our politics is not something we should be frightened of. The world is an unjust place, and it's our duty to talk loudly about injustice. And of the families who went to the prisons, never in those years did they say life was hard to the prisoner, and never in those years did the prisoner say life was hard to the families. Neither knew, and they derived their mutual strength from believing that they were giving the other hope for the future. And so when one looks at the work that HHUGS does, we're in the Hilton. There are many people here. There are going to be many people tonight who will donate money for the work HHUGS does. But it is maybe useful for HHUGS to know, and the people whom HHUGS supports, that Sister Sarah was condemned by her own church. She was condemned by the police. She was fingerprinted. She was banned from ever visiting a prisoner with whom she corresponded in an English jail because she was said to be a risk to national security. And so when HHUGS has had to bravely fight for the right to be charitable, the right to support those who are outlawed by society, the legitimacy and the correctness morally to support not just the families, but those in prison, whatever they're accused of, as Sister Sarah would say. She said they are all innocent, whether they're innocent or not. And you understand precisely what she meant. We are at a time now when another community, not the Irish, is intended to be in fear, is designed to be put in fear if it is involved in charitable work. It is designed to be frightened off that work. If a doctor is driving with a convoy to Syria, does she really deserve to be questioned by the Charity Commission about her faith and her motivation? Does it need to be questioned why a doctor would be driving an ambulance to a war zone? A devout Muslim helping Muslims in a war zone, is that appropriate? Or is it designed to frighten those who would do good, do right? And so, tonight, if Sister Sarah Clark were here, 5 minutes. I can do it more quickly than that. If she were here, alive today, she died in 2002, and she did get to meet the men and women when they were released under the Good Friday Agreement. She did get to meet them. But if she were alive today, I would love to tell her about HHUGS. I would love to tell her about the work it does. I would love to tell her about the relationship of mutual trust and respect and love of the families and hugs for each other. I would love to do that. And she would be so happy. She would say, what they are doing is totally, totally, totally the right thing to do. Whatever anyone says, however difficult they make it, they must keep going.
There's not a mother in this world who wouldn't be happy to have a home for her family.